very good evening to you. A warm welcome to Interface here on SABC3. My name is Tembisa Machele. Well, 3 people have reportedly died in Muthutlong in Brits, allegedly at the hands of police. This has brought the issue of police brutality back in the spotlight. According to the South African Institute of Race Relations, our country's police officers are under enormous stress as the murder rate in South Africa increases. The report also revealed that South African police officers are exposed to more violent crime than other officers in any other country may see in their entire careers. So what does this all mean, and how does it work towards building a new South Africa? Well, our guests tonight are Andries van Wyk, who is a Member of Parliament and the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, joining us from our Parliament studios. Welcome to you. And we're also joined by Johan Burger, who is a Senior Researcher at the Institute of Security Studies. Thank you very much for joining us, Johan. Welcome to the program. Remember that if you'd like to join in the discussion, you can find us on our Facebook page. It's Interface on SABC3, and we'll take some of your comments a little later on the program. Well, let's start with you, Johan. The whole idea that police brutality is on the increase in South Africa, is that real or is it perceived?
Well, I think it's real to a large extent, although there's been some improvement in the last year, but against a very, very high figure. If you consider the fact that police brutality cases investigated by the Independent Police Investigative Directorate increased by just over 300% within this last decade, less than a decade, about 8 to 9 years. The only good news is in the year before last, it showed a slight decrease of about 7%. But we are talking about something like just over 1,700 cases of real cases of police brutality.
But what's happening here? What happened, for example, in the year you mentioned where it was on the decrease, and why are we seeing 300% of an increase over 10 years?
Well, I think, this is something that happened, the increase happened gradually for a number of reasons. Also keep in mind that during the same period, the police themselves increased their numbers by almost 60,000 in the same period. So there is some correlation there. But also during the same period, we've seen a dramatic increase, for example, in a number of cases of public demonstrations. I mean, just in terms of, for example, service delivery protests, we saw an increase from about 25 in the last, 4 or 5 years ago, to 155 last year. That's a dramatic increase.
Jump.
And these are just service delivery protests, and about 80% of them are violent protests.
Johan, let me bring Andries van Wyk here, who is the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police. When you hear the stats that Johan is talking about, how do you reflect on what's happening with the police?
There's a couple of things that I do agree with you on that I think he's highlighted, is the fact that there was an increase in service protest. There were also an increase in personnel within the South African police services. I also do think one needs to take in consideration the fact that at the same point, what your crime figure for that year as well, and what percentage of cases does this reflect on. And if it's actually almost less than 1% of the total number of cases that SABC investigate. With that, I'm not saying that it's acceptable, not at all.
Sure.
I'm just trying to create the context of this. I also think as well what we need to realize is we can't only look at the raw figures that they actually investigate. One needs to look at what were the findings on those figures, because many of those cases, they did find that there was no case. So in the end, I think what is important is that we look at the figures that the IPAD has investigated that resulted in a finding from their side.
But Andries, let's reflect on some of the cases, some of the big ones that have made the news. Emidio, Macia, Marikana, Andries, Tatane, and now Muthutlong. When we speak to the Minister of Police, for example, or we speak to Madame Ria Piecha, we hear that these are just isolated incidents and that it's not reflective of what's happening in the police force. Do you agree with that view?
Yes, to a great extent I do. I think the vast majority of the South African Police Service members are honest members. They serve the country with dedication, and they really want to do the best in their jobs. We do, however, and we can't deny it, and if we deny it, even as management, if we deny that we do have a group of people that are bringing the South African Police Service in disrepute, then we are making a mistake as well. There are definitely some rogue elements within the South African Police Service that we need to address and that we need to that need to be dealt with.
Johanna, are these just rogue elements, or is there something systematically or systemically wrong with what's happening with the police force?
There clearly are a number of systemic problems within the police service, but I agree with Andries. You know, we have to be careful and not generalize some of these events. If, for example, you look at the total number of crowd management incidents that happens in South Africa on a yearly basis, just about 13 to 14,000 of these. And if you consider the very few cases where there are incidents of so-called police brutality, then you realize that, you know, unfortunately, these incidents then becomes the yardstick that the police are being measured, and you get the impression that at every incident where there's a number of people together and the police are called in, then the police use violent methods, and that certainly is not the case.
And if there are these rogue elements, and if the police system has got, for example, a code of conduct, there are measures that are put in place to try and deal with these elements, is this reflective of them not working as well as they should be?
Well, you know, now if we look at the systemic problems that we are referring to, then one, in my view, and certainly the view at the Institute, is that one of the big deficiencies in the police service at this point is that they tend to wait for independent bodies to investigate, such as IPID and even Parliament. And we very seldom hear about the police's own internal investigations. And what are they doing to determine where things do go wrong? What do they do themselves to determine why it went wrong, and what do they put in place to prevent this from happening again?
Andries, are you putting pressure at all then on the police to act within themselves and have those measures within the police force to try and deal with these issues before, you know, a parliamentary committee or, you know, IPID has to say something?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. You just need to look at the record of the Police Portfolio Committee to see that we do put pressure. And I want to agree with you on. I did hear this morning that the SABC themselves are also investigating what is happening, what happened this week with the death of the 4 people, which is welcome. The inspectorate is investigating that. We do put pressure on them. I believe that if we talk about systemic issues, because I also agree with you on that there are systemic problems that need to be addressed. We've got rogue elements, and we can't ignore either of these elements that are present. Otherwise, we will not solve the problem. We've got rogue elements, they need to be dealt with. We've got systemic problems that need to be addressed. And whether those systemic problems are management at that point in time, whether it's personnel numbers at that point in time, and I'll explain why I say personnel numbers, or whether it is the fact that they don't have adequate resources to to police a crowd properly, that needs to be addressed. And if you're in denial, you will not identify these elements that need to be addressed, and you won't be able to take the necessary steps.
We have to take a short break. And when you say, Andries, that there are systemic problems and that we need to deal with them, what needs to be done? That's the question we're asking right after this break. And remember, if you've got thoughts, hit us up on our Facebook page. It's Interface on SABC3. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Interface, and we're talking about police brutality. We heard recently that a poll revealed that South Africans are actually very scared of police and that we have lost, by and large, confidence in our police force. Why is that? Give us your thoughts on our Facebook page, Interface on SABC3, and also what should be done to deal with the issues that the police face on a daily basis. And our guest tonight talking about this, Andries van Wyk in our parliamentary studios, chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, and Johan Burger, who is a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Let's look at the how of this, Johan. Andries was also reflecting on these systemic problems. What do we do about it? If you're talking about the numbers of the police force, if you're talking about leadership issues, whatever it is that is systemic, what do we do about it?
Well, there are a range of issues when we talk about systemic problems that needs to be addressed. But I think a number of them were already were raised in Parliament, issues that were acknowledged by the Minister and also the National Commissioner. For example, you start with the whole recruitment process to make certain that you recruit the right people, that they adhere to the minimum recruitment standards.
But you would assume that that's being done currently.
Yes, but it's not always done. I mean, there are areas where it's obvious that people were recruited into the police service who should never have been there. Corruption also in some areas played a role where people were able to buy their way into the police service. Also, and if you look at the Green Paper on policing, where there's also acknowledgement that even in the training process, there was an attitude. It's not part of a policy, but it's almost an unwritten policy, if you want, where there was a pass one, pass all attitude. So some students or recruits who passed through the training process who should never have been allowed to join the police service, they should have fell out of the training process. You look at command and control, which is a huge issue, to make certain that appropriate people are appointed to key positions and that they are properly trained to manage those positions, and also the internal oversight structures of the police. The Inspectorate has, in the last few years, started to a process of improving the things that they should be doing, regular inspections at all police offices.
Are we seeing a difference as a result of that, though?
Well, it's early days yet.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the head of that division recently died. So that might also have some impact. We hope we have a capable person that replaces him.
In fact, before I come to you, Andries, I just want to take a couple of Facebook messages. Penelope Greer says there's a large number of policemen and women who have criminal records who should never have been appointed to the police service. Monique Kim Henry says we need greater and more efficient interdepartmental coordination in drafting policies in response to the crime rates in this country. And Natasha Dean Allison says harsher sentencing for criminals, enhancing training and development, and access to resources within the SAPS will address the problem. What are your thoughts? I mean, reflecting on particularly the fact that you can have even high-ranking officials with criminal records.
I just want to correct the issue. The fact of the matter is, yes, there are quite a number, and we are very dissatisfied about it, and we've made it quite clear to the management of South African Police Service, so that the Minister, and that they need to clean out the service of these characters. But I want to make it clear that these people, most of them, 99% of them, acquired their criminal record while in the South African Police Service. So they were not appointed with a criminal record.
All right, even be that as it may, though.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's an excuse.
Sure, I understand, but I'm saying once
excuse.
That's found out, shouldn't they be kicked out immediately or have some process that kind of takes them out of the system?
Well, we're in a bit of a dispute with the management on this issue, and I want to address the systemic issues as well, because it's my belief, if it's a requirement for you to join the South African Police Service without a criminal record, if you then acquire a criminal record while in service,
yes,
you have disqualified and discharged yourself.
Exactly.
So there is a bit of a process, but there is also labour laws that needs to be adhered to, etc., etc. But we are in the process to discuss these issues with management and to make sure that they deal with it decisively as well. That is the one element. I do believe that Johan has touched on many of the others, the recruitment, and I agree with him there. Management, I believe, at all levels needs to be addressed. Not just at national level, at all levels. Management is a daily process, it's not an event, and it should happen at all levels. At station level, at the divisions within a station, we want to see absolute management with consequences, not management
How
for the sake of
do we do
management.
that? What needs to happen practically? If you were to advise the police commissioner today and say A and B and C is what needs to take place today, what would those be?
One word only, consequences. If you send out an instruction and that instruction is not adhered to, there should be consequences. And I don't care whether that person is the lowest of ranks within the South African Police Service or the highest of ranks. Unless there are consequences for not adhering to basic principles of the police service, then we will not see the change that we all require. And that is what we need to see. We need to see from station level upwards consequences if there are no adherence to the state
Let's pick up on
instructions.
that point, Johan. The consequences, the conviction rate, for example. We're told that it's so low with police officers that if they do commit the crimes, it takes too long to actually get them to be punished for it, if at all.
Well, absolutely. And I think Andries made a very, very great point here. This is one of the big problems in the police services, that police officers knows they will probably get away with what they do, and what they do illegally, unlawfully. And there are no consequences for that. There are very few cases there are consequences. Very often it's only in high-profile cases that you see consequences. So this really needs to change. But can I just mention something else?
Let's pick that up after the short break. We've got to take a quick break. And I do want to invite your thoughts on Facebook, Interface on SABC3, what you think should be done to improve the system in the police service. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about police brutality, and you wanted to make a point, Johan, just before the break.
Yes, I think some of the issues we've been talking about now, the systemic issues that we've addressed here, many of these are also addressed in the National Development Plan. There's a whole chapter, chapter 12, that deals with the police issues. And there's a number of very, very good recommendations about how these should be addressed. And my question really is, and I mean, Cabinet already approved the National Development Plan, is when will we see some sort of implementation plan to implement those recommendations that were already approved, and in my view, that will go a long way towards addressing these problem areas.
Well, Annelies, you're close enough to the action. When do you think we're likely to see an implementation plan?
Well, we have been engaging with the management on this issue. Again, Johan knows that unfortunately South African Police Service is a huge ship, and to get the ship to start turning takes a while. But some of these issues requires action from them at that level. Other issues are political issues that needs to be driven from that level. But we have been engaging with them. Some of the issues slowly but surely are being implemented. We will, when we engage with them again this year, take it up with them, because we also believe that some of the answers lies within the National Development Plan's proposals. But it's also not the only answers. There are other things that needs to be done as well.
Just quickly highlight for us, I mean, for those who haven't perhaps seen it, what are some of the key recommendations in the NDP?
Well, one of the recommendations that I think can go a long way is that a board of commissioners be appointed that can advise the SABC management on some of the issues that are happening and can give some direction. Now, for me, that is one of the places where I believe that we can, we should zoom into, because there are such a lot of experience out there, such a lot of people who can assist, that we need to put up our hand and say, here we are, we want to do that, and see those appointments taking place. I think that will assist greatly in management challenges as well.
Johan, just reflecting on the role of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, how independent is this directorate when in fact it reports to the same place or the same entity that the SABC reports to, and that is the Ministry of Police? How independent can they be in investigating police brutality?
Well, I must say that I have a fair amount of confidence in the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. I think what they do need a lot more resources and so on. That's another matter. But I think in terms of investigations against police members in general, they have done relatively well with the limited resources they have, especially since IPIT came into being. Keep in mind that its predecessor, the ICD, the Independent Complaints Directorate, did not have the necessary teeth to dig into these problems into the police service. IPIT is now in existence for just under 2 years, and I think they are starting to prove themselves in these types of investigations. But again, you know, I think we need to have a much stronger internal body in the police service. The inspectorate needs to be much more dynamic in terms of the work they do, and we also need to have a more dynamic approach internally in the police service in terms of internal investigations against police officers and disciplinary action against police officers. And, you know, there's far too little of that.
Just speaking about that, Andries, when you hear reports that the cops that were involved in the Marikana shooting were actually, some of them were the same as the ones that were involved in Motothlong in Brits, something is wrong there.
You see, it's difficult. To some extent, I agree with you because, it's, again, for me, it speaks to management and it speaks to consequences. I'm not saying that these people should be fined because no findings have been made against them yet. But surely, if you are in doubt about somebody being able to do the job, you remove them until you have established whether they are capable of doing that job properly before you redeploy them to the same job. So that is a challenge. Just in terms of IPIT as well, I absolutely agree with Johan that they've got, and I must stress this point, that this Minister of Police, the very same Minister of Police, introduced this legislation that gave them the necessary teeth to deal with the situation. So for me, there's no problem them reporting to the same member of the executive. For me, it is a question of taking up the legislative power that you've been given and making sure that you use that to the interest of the South African population as a whole.
So in the beginning, I spoke about some of the stress and the pressures that are reportedly on our South African police service, and that, you know, they deal with cases that others in other countries are not likely to deal with in their entire careers. What kind of impact does that have on our service?
Well, you know, if you look at the number of police officers killed every year, I mean, last year, 84. You know, some of the so-called developed countries, if they have 84 in a century, that is a lot. If you look at suicides in the police service, approximately the same number of police officers commit suicide. And these are just the things, the visible signs of the stress that we see. And under the surface, there are much more. If you look at our crime levels, there was reference to murder, more than 16,000 murders last year. Countries such as the United Kingdom, for example, less than 800 murders in the same period, with a much bigger population. And those are just murders. And you look at other serious crimes, such as aggravated robbery, large gangs, 16, 18 people armed with submachine guns, and our police members have to confront them on the streets on a daily basis. So,
Andries, just in closing then, listening to some of the stats that Johan is outlining now and looking at what is available to the police in terms of therapy, counseling, and all of those kind of things, do we have sufficient measures in place to deal with that?
There's one challenge that we do have, and it's something that we need to address in the SABC Act when the SABC Act gets reviewed. And they're in the process, they're finalising the white paper, and then the Act will follow. And it's something that I've been on the case of the officials who are responsible for this in a major way, and they will confirm that with you, is that counselling, instead of it being out of choice, should become compulsory.
All right.
So that, because there's... Okay.
No, yes, you can finish your sentence at least.
No, I just wanted to say, because there's a belief if you go for counselling that you are weak, and that's nonsense, because as Johan say, the kind of violence that these people are exposed to, they do need counselling, and it would take strength of them to actually go and to get that counselling.
All right, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thank you to both my guests for coming through to talk about this issue. Do continue to give us your thoughts on our Facebook page. We do want to get this right as a country. It's Interface on SABC3. Good night.